Okay. Hi everyone, this is SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com, and I'm back with another video analysis this week. This week is going to focus on a concept that I've always found, I found very difficult, up until just a few years ago, in all honesty. I was an 1800 player, and I didn't understand the idea of weak colors. I knew about weak squares, right? For instance, we know that here, this is black's fianchetto bishop, and as long as it's here, these squares aren't too weak. However, if this bishop were to be traded or exchanged somehow, then these squares become very weak. I understood that. I knew about, the basic checkmating threats, right? White would try and get this bishop here, and he'd try and get the queen here, then he's got an easy checkmate, right? I knew about those types of ideas. But the idea of the weak colors, that these are weak dark squares, I never understood that. Who cares what color they are? What's important is that they're weak. That's how I thought. And it was only, again, relatively recently that I actually figured this out. So if you're anything like me, maybe this is also a mystery to you. Good bishops, bad bishops, all this stuff. Hopefully I can simplify that. Hopefully. We'll see. Let me know how I do. Also, as a side note, this is February 2018. Again, I'm too busy to actually play chess during the week, and so I have no games to analyze. That's what I do with my channel. I analyze my games. And so until approximately March, maybe April, if you send me your games, either in the comment or on chess.com or on my blog, SmithyQ.com, I will make a video analysis for you. And so this offer is open to anyone up until approximately March, April. Just letting that out there, the offer still stands. So, let's learn about weak squares, and more importantly for this lesson, weak colors. So if you look at this position, we can see that all of White's pawns, with the exception of this guy, 7 out of 8 of his pawns are on light squares. And so this means a couple of things. Obviously, all his pawns are on light squares, but his light squares are fairly strong. Everything is protected. All these pawns are protected. This bishop has incredible range, right? It can go just about anywhere in the white position, and it's not blocked by anything. The reverse side to that, of course, is this bishop is terrible. It's staring at its own pawns. It can't do anything. And the dark squares are natural spots for the black pieces to land. We can see that right here. This knight is probably black's best piece. It's on a good square. It's fairly annoying for white. And this knight, it wants to come here. If this knight could land here and stay there permanently without getting exchanged, that'd be a very good piece as well. And so this is the first thing that weak colors can help us identify. But then this is no different than just a weak square. We understand that. Where does the color come from? Another thing that we can think about, I'll get to that in a second, I'll answer that question, is that it's easy to say that this is White's bad bishop and this is White's good bishop. And then we can say the same thing. All of Black's pieces are on dark squares. Sorry, most of his pawns are on dark squares. So this is his bad bishop and that's his good bishop, right? We can see that. But at the same time, I'm thinking, who cares if it's good or bad bishops? Both bishops suck. Like, right? This is this is Black's good bishop, right, in theory, but what can it do? There's no available squares. Everywhere it wants to go, a white pawn protects it. This bishop actually can't go anywhere. And so who cares if it's good? Who cares if it's bad? Like, I should just exchange it on my first go. This is how I used to think. And I still do, it's a prejudice I've had to overcome. And I'm hoping that this example can really bring it home. This is a game, this position was two 2,600 players, if I can pronounce their names right. It's Anton Korobov versus Evgeny Miroshchenko. This is back in 2008. And in this position, Black plays a rather fantastic move, Bishop f6. And now if you're anything like me, the first thing you're thinking about is, why did Black just give up a pawn? He's a 2,600 player. He couldn't, obviously there's something deeper behind this, and there is. And White did not accept this pawn sacrifice. And so, what we need to realize is that, well first, what is Black's idea? It's not obviously just to move his bishop back. His idea would be bishop g5, and then after a pair of exchanges, we've noticed the following. And this is perhaps key to the whole idea of weak colors, is that yes, Black is down a pawn, but let's look 2 moves ahead. So this is the best move, king g7. And what's happened is that because all of white's pawns are on light squares, again, his dark squares are very weak, his remaining bishop is absolutely terrible. And what's going to happen is black's going to essentially go on all the dark squares. He's going to bring his knight to this beautiful dark square. His queen's already on a dark square. This rook is going to slide over. It's an open file, aiming at a dark square. Very hard to defend. Right? Black's got a very good attack here for a single pawn. And what is white's counterplay? He doesn't really have anything. He has to sit there and let black just come at him. And this is very hard to defend. A computer already likes black, I like black, everyone likes black. Now at the same time, let's look at the bishops for a second. Because they're both light squared bishops, right? And it's true, this bishop can't help right now, right? There's no actual targets. But let's back up. We see this bishop. What can this bishop do? This bishop stares at its own pawns. It does nothing. Maybe it can go to f1 to reinforce the g2 square, but that's it. This bishop is purely defensive. It is 100% a bad bishop. And we look at this bishop. Now it's true, right now it can't go anywhere and be safe. But what it can do is it can help support black's attack. For instance, this f5 break, the bishop's helping, right? It's supporting that. It's helping this pawn, because if this file opens up, the rook's on an open file. Another file for black. Another possibility is that this bishop could go to h3. Right? Even if there wasn't a pin there, it could be a potential sacrifice, opening up lines to get closer to the king. It's an idea. It's possible. This bishop can do something active. This bishop cannot. So even though this position is completely blocked, this is a good bishop. That was the idea. And I didn't realize this. And I'd get to positions like this. I'd be white. I'm up a pawn. I should be winning, right? And then 20 moves later, 15, 20 moves later, I lose, I get checkmated. And it was so frustrating because I'm looking through, I'm trying to find where was my mistake. And there wasn't really any one move that allowed black to get an overwhelming position. It was just my position was bad because it's good bishop, bad bishop. That's it. So this is kind of the first thing about weak colors, is that if you can recognize this, you can realize which are your good pieces and which are your bad pieces. If we actually back up, when black played this bishop f6, allowing this bishop takes h6, his whole idea was to exchange this dark squared bishop. Because after bishop g5, take, and take, now black got rid of his worst piece, his bishop staring at his own pawn, in exchange for his opponent's best piece, his dark squared bishop. And so by realizing there's weak colors, we can zero in on which pieces we should trade. Now there's a second point about understanding weak colors. Because if we back up, you might be thinking, Smithy, can't white just take the rook? Isn't that better than taking the bishop? And here's where the second idea of the weak colors comes in, is that if you understand, if you can recognize that a certain color is weak, then you can really focus on those colors. So in this case, on the dark squares. And if you zero in, tactics almost start appearing like magic. And if you put your pieces on the most forward dark squares, the squares essentially closest to the king, in this case, because that's what we want, we're going to attack the king. Good things happen. And just watch that. From here, instead of taking back the bishop, we focus on the dark squares. Bishop e3. Check. He moves his king. Now again, we think about the dark squares. And if you look, you'll see this move. Again on the dark squares. And after queen f8, there's actually no defense against queen h6 checkmate. Well, okay, so knight f1, check. Knight f2 blocking the check, and then after king g7, the rook's going to slide over, and that's mate. We'll get actual style points, actually, because we can sacrifice the queen, and this will be checkmate. Okay, technically, now it's checkmate. All right, but you see that? You see how by focusing on the dark squares, this tactic in a block position appears because we focused on that. Right? And we can also see, because all these pawns are on light squares, it's completely stopping white from coming in to help. He can't do anything. And that's the power. So if you focus on the dark squares, this can start you start seeing this more often. Again, if you don't understand weak squares, weak colors, will you see bishop e3 and knight g3? Maybe, right? I mean, why not? You can see almost any move, but it's harder. And when you have this, where you're always thinking, okay, his dark squares are weak, can I invade? Do the sacrifices work? If you do that often enough, and your position's good enough, it does start working. And it's pretty cool. It's very cool. And it really shows you some moves that you might not consider otherwise. All right? This here was just a game that I analyzed recently. Neither player actually went down these variations. Of course, they're too good to fall for such tactics, right? But there's another position, and this is actually the game where I first realized the idea of the weak colors. So I'm just going to pull that up now. Okay, so here we go. I must apologize. I don't have the names for the players of the following two games. This is simply something that I've memorized and I put in my database, and I unfortunately didn't include the player names, so I apologize for that. In this position, we can see here that, let me just skip ahead. Take right here, because this is really the important part, is that both of black's bishops are absolutely fine, and they can go just about anywhere. We can see with white, he's got these two pawns on light squares, which would normally be a good Murakami bind structure, one of my favorite structures, in fact. However, it's not so good right now, because this bishop is basically a pawn, staring at it, and the dark squares all around here can be very weak. And we'll actually see that coming up. And so knight c3, well, let's put our bishop c5. It's on a great diagonal, right? And now, that bishop is so annoying that in this particular game, white plays knight a4, trying to get rid of it. And after bishop d4, the bishop, again, simply cements itself as the best piece. If you want to back up, there's actually something interesting here, is that one of white's main ideas in such a position is to play the f4 break. After king h1, there's actually an incredible tactic that involves, well, obviously it involves the dark squares. And so it starts off with knight g4. And we can see that already we're targeting the h2, right? Also notice that the queen can slide down to h4. Let me actually put some arrows down here, right? And the dark square are very, very weak. And even though white does have a dark square bishop, it can't help. It's not doing anything. It's these weaknesses are over here. It's hard for the bishop is too far away. And then after f3, if we focus on the dark squares, tactics start appearing. Now, yes, knight f2, that looks very, very tempting. That forces white to give up the exchange. But there's something else, something even better, and it would be knight takes h2, where obviously take. Well, that's checkmate, so that's not very good. But what else does white do? And the problem is that his dark squares are so weak, and again, all these pawns are on light squares, stopping white from bringing any of those pieces in. And it's incredible. Right now his rook's attacked, and if he tries to move his rook, we bring the queen out again to a dark square, like magic, and there's actually no defense to checkmate coming up. For example, after bishop e3, knight takes f3, discover double checkmate. Wow. And how did this happen? Because of the weak dark squares. By focusing on them, tactics start appearing almost like magic. If we back up. So again, in the game, king h1 wasn't played. White wanted to chase this bishop away, again, so we could get f4 in. And so he played knight a4, then bishop d4, queen c2. So again, now we're following pretty much a very similar idea to the last variation, is that black is focusing on dark squares. He's thinking about that, and he plays knight g4 with very similar ideas. All right, again, he's pressuring this f2 square. The queen wants to come out, and there's going to be, well, holy hell to pay. Well, white's probably just lost at that point. So he tries to kick the knight away. h3, and h5. The attack just keeps coming. And this is, again, this is sort of beyond the dark squares, but we can really see the power of the dark square bishop. Right? It's just absolutely phenomenal. It's pressuring here. If it ever got chased away somehow, it could always slide all the way back down to a7, and it's just so annoying for white. If white accepts the piece sacrifice, take, he's basically lost. The queen's going to come here, checkmate in 2 moves. It's impossible to move the pawn to let the king escape. That'd be great, but the bishop's there. So it doesn't work. The only thing you might be able to do is try g3, but then after queen f6, and then queen g6, queen h5. As you can see, the queen just moved its way to the h file. Took a little bit longer, but doesn't matter. It's going to be checkmate pretty much next move. So white cannot take the piece. So what white did in the game is he played bishop d2. If you can think of a better move, that'd be awesome. Now here's again where if you know the dark squares are weak, and we know that because these 2 pawns are on light squares. This light square bishop is absolutely terrible. Our dark square bishop is a beast. There's actually no defenders near the black king. Sorry, the white king. And so we think about the dark squares. Queen h4. Bishop c3. So he's trying to exchange our bishop, and then maybe kick our pieces away and do something. Now, we could just move the bishop away. That's perfectly fine. But again, we focus on the dark squares. We think about that. Where are the weakest squares? Can we put our pieces on those squares? And it turns out we can. Queen g3, using the pin, threatening h2 checkmate. White is forced to take, and now there's a threat of checkmate here on h2. After rook h2, again, the dark squares. Rook h2, now we're threatening mate on g2, and if bishop f1, queen h4, that's checkmate. Just like that. 17 moves. And this game left such an incredible mark on me, because it seemed like white was completely helpless. I backed up all the way to here. And it's true, actually, this particular variation of the Sicilian Khan is considered better for black, because in this structure, both the black's bishops can come out, his knight is good, as you can see, you can get a very easy attack on the king side, and white just has a bad bishop. He does not have the typical Maroczy bind structure. And we can see that. He develops his knight. Okay, knight a4, that's moving a piece twice the opening. That's not very good. He tries to get that bishop away. Queen c2 seems normal, right? Kicking the knight away seems normal. Trying to develop our pieces and kick that bishop away. All this seems normal. It seems understandable, and yet he's completely lost. And the reason for that was, again, the weak squares, and particularly the weak color. And black took advantage of that absolutely fantastically. And again, by focusing on the dark squares, it gives us clues to potential tactics, right? Playing queen g3, fantastic. And then again, even though our bishop is attacked, and if our bishop were to move or to retreat somewhere, our queen is potentially hanging, we don't have to worry about that. We just keep coming in. We focus on the squares, and that's it. So that's really how I've started, or how I've understood thinking about weak colors, is that, well, yes, they are weaknesses, right? Just like with a weak square, you want to think, how can I put my pieces on those weak squares? With weak colors, it's similar, but it's more broad. You focus on, basically half the board, those colors, and if you dig in, can you put your pieces there? Because very often you can. It's true, there's sacrifices, but they can lead to something, amazing. Hopefully you found this as inspiring as I did. Again, this is just this is art to me. This is just wow. This is the pure positional concept of weak color, right there. So hopefully you found that helpful. Hopefully you found that useful. Again, SmithyQ, SmithyQ.com. If you got questions, comments, I'd love to hear it. Again, you got a game want me to analyze until approximately March, maybe April. I'll do it. It's free. My gift to you. So that's that. Okay. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.